Christmas on Lindbergh Mountain. To all who hear these words, may your lives be filled with the fantasy, warmth, and magic of Christmas, now and forever.
Ho, ho, ho!
It was Christmas Eve and Santa Claus was coming to Lindbergh Mountain tonight. Kristen and Ryan were very excited. Kristen stood outside Feeney's department store with her nose almost pressing the tall, cold glass of the window that was as big as a house. Hail swept snowflakes blew into her little face. As she gazed at the dolls, play kitchens, bicycles, and delightful teddy bears, all positioned as if calling to her, "Come and play with us." Behind the window she could see Santa sitting in a big chair as a line of children waited to talk to him. She had already talked to Santa 2 days before, but she wanted to visit him just one more time before Christmas came. You see, she had changed her mind about everything she had asked for on her Christmas list. She forgot to ask Santa for something very important. She told herself that she just had to change her Christmas list. She was sure he wouldn't mind too terribly. After all, he was Santa, and he loved children and had more patience with them than almost anyone. She cautiously entered the store and got in line behind all the other excited children. She bit her lip worriedly as she got closer and closer to Santa. His eyes twinkled brightly as he seemed to recognize her from her earlier visit. Finally, it was her turn, and she climbed up on Santa's lap and said hurriedly, "My brother and I just want coal, Santa. Instead of piles of presents, could you please bring us coal? And Santa, please look very hard for our cabin on Lindbergh Mountain, please." And Santa's face softly changed, and it told Kristen that he was curious and kind and very wise all at the same time. And he said, "But Kristen, you and your brother are very good children. Toys from the North Pole are more fun than lumps of coal." In her mind's eye, she could see what she had asked for from her first Christmas list, a dazzling watch and a new bike. She could also see the great pile of presents, wrapped in shiny green paper and tied with red braided ribbon that had sat under her Christmas tree just last year before she and her family had to move to the little cramped cabin with only an old coal stove for cooking and heating alike. In all of Santa's worldwide travels, no one had ever asked him just for coal. He patted Kristen on top of her soft, shiny brown hair and said, "We'll see. We'll see. You go along now and be a good little girl." Kristen climbed down from Santa's lap and scrunched up her little face and wished as hard as she could that Santa would reconsider and bring her family the coal that they so needed. As Santa watched her turn to walk away, he felt the warm, reassuring hand of Mrs. Claus on his shoulder. She had been, as was her custom, standing by his side. "Something must be terribly wrong at Kristen's house," Santa whispered to Mrs. Claus. "She's such a good little girl. Perhaps I will show her the secret of the reindeer this Christmas Eve." "Oh, my! Will she be the one to receive the secret of the reindeer this year, Santa?" Mrs. Claus asked with such excitement. "I must talk with the elves at the North Pole first," Santa replied, "but I think that they will agree that we should show Kristen the secret, and she will be the only one this year." Kristen walked in the icy blizzard towards home. She worried that Santa wouldn't be able to find her new home. It was such a tiny cabin that was almost obscured by trees in the little village of Lindbergh Mountain. How would Santa ever see it from the sky in this awful storm? She and her family had moved there because her daddy had lost his job, and there was no longer enough money to pay for their old house on Holly Hill in Chinquapin. And what a house it was! She missed her old bedroom with the deep windowsills that were just the right height to sit in and read and watch the birds outside. Her mommy made her soft cushions for the window seat, and Kristen would snuggle there for hours, sometimes with a hot cocoa, and sometimes she would even let her silly little brother Ryan sit with her. It was always so warm and safe in her old room, even on the coldest days of winter. The cabin was different. It was never really warm, and even though her mommy had worked so very hard to make it feel like home, Kristen could not forget the cobwebs, spiderwebs, and unfamiliar shadows on the walls that greeted them all when they first opened the door to the cabin on Lindbergh Mountain. The floors creak when you walk, and at night the winter wind shakes the old place. The bells on the necks of the flocking sheep sounded so nice in the day, but at night their ringing took on a melancholy tone, especially when mixed with the howls of the coyotes that sounded to Kristen as if they were as big as wolves. Her mommy and daddy talked about needing money for coal for the old stove, and they looked so sad when they read her Christmas list that contained the bicycle and watch and dozens of other things that Kristen had then thought were important. "Kristen, things will be different this Christmas," her daddy told her. "It is not like it was on Holly Hill. Your mommy and I will not be able to give each other presents, and I read in the Lindbergh Gazette that Santa won't be able to find his way to Lindbergh Mountain. But please believe me, the love that we all have for each other will more than make up for not having presents. This Christmas, we're going to pay special attention to the mountains of love your mommy and I have for you and your brother." "Don't worry, Daddy. I know that Santa will come just like every other year," Kristen said. And it was then that she decided to change her Christmas list and go and see Santa one more time. It was dark by the time Kristen got home, and she found her mommy stirring a big pot of vegetable soup on top of the old coal stove. Her daddy had found work that day chopping wood for old Mrs. Robbins, who lived in a big, fine house down the mountain. Her daddy was so happy to be working today of all days, and he took his earnings and bought enough coal to last for 3 days, and some potatoes and onions and celery and carrots so that Kristen's mommy could make some lovely soup. And he bought some apples, and he had just enough money left for a cinnamon stick so that they could bake the apples and sprinkle them with cinnamon. It wasn't a lot of food, but it would taste so good and keep them warm for a few days and make the cabin at least smell like a fine Christmas, like the ones they used to have on Holly Hill. After eating their soup, Kristen and her brother Ryan huddled under a red and green nutcracker blanket with their mommy on the old sofa. Her daddy was fast asleep in the chair. Just a few lumps of coal burned in the stove, for they were very careful to only use a bit every day to make it last through Christmas. Kristen's mommy saved 2 big carrots and one of the apples to leave out for the reindeer, just in case they came tonight after all. And Kristen snuggled under the covers, and she worried about what her daddy had said about Santa not being able to come to Lindbergh Mountain. And she tried to keep her eyes open, but she dozed off to sleep. A paint-peeled sleigh made of heavy-hewn oak left the North Pole. Santa took 2 elves, a trio of pretty angels, a clown, and of course Mrs. Claus. They flew like a flash of lightning. It was a treacherous trip with bone-chilling air, and the snow fell harder than ever before. They tiptoed from the sleigh, and Cupid, Santa's favorite reindeer, pawed and pawed until the rope that held the old cabin door shut was untied. The sound of ringling and jingling of bells made Kristen stir. She thought she heard a stirring in the chimney. A bright light flashed red, green, yellow, and amazingly, somehow, all the colors at once. She pulled her nightcap tightly over her ears so the wonderful dream would continue forever. She heard a scratch, 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 like the sounds of a kitten's paw on a box. The shade on the window moved. "She's sound asleep," a squeaky voice exclaimed, and hundreds of tiny creatures wearing aprons adorned with the words "Christmas Folk" spilled in and out of the window at once. The clock chimed 2:15 a.m. Kristen had been peering at what she thought was surely a dream from under her soft, woolly blanket. Her family looked to be fast asleep. She blinked because something seemed to be flying around. And then a most incredible scene unfolded before her sleepy eyes. Packages were being pulled from a beautiful sack. Bright red paper, foil flowers, and silver crinkled bows. A jack-in-the-box clown fashioned gingerbread cookies that smelled as if they were still baking in the oven, while a little fairy hung the cookies from the ceiling. A porcelain doll stood over a whistling kettle of chamomile tea, while a robot painted the finishing touches on a model ship. And Santa himself decorated a lovely fir tree with candy canes, lacy white snowflakes, and popcorn and cranberry chains. There was holly and red berries filling every nook and cranny of the cabin. It was a sight to behold. But wait. There was a crash outside and more bells rang out. Kristen jumped up and ran to the window to look outside. How could her brother and Mommy and Daddy be sleeping through this? In the bright light of the snow, she saw more than 100 shiny new sleighs, covered with jewels and brass bells, and pulled by both glossy ebony horses and at least 200 cinnamon-colored reindeer. Each sleigh had a name decoratively carved into the wooden side. Kristen could see the words China, Africa, Canada, Japan, England, Germany, the United States, and Mexico. What seemed like thousands of thin-as-paper winged fairies and pink and purple jacketed elves jumped in the drifts of snow, squealing and laughing. They spoke in so many different languages that Kristen had no idea what they were saying, and still her family slept on and on through the beautiful turmoil. The elves had pigtails with red satin bows and gold-pierced ears. Glittery gold bracelets and slippers were jingling and shimmering. Pockets were filled to overflowing with cakes and candy and treats. Bells rang out in the night sky as the mystery of Santa Claus and his visits around the world unfolded. He didn't do it with just one sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. Thousands and thousands of helpers, called the Christmas folks, trudged through snowbanks and climbed the vines into her house. This was Santa's secret. A caravan of sleighs had come to Lindbergh Mountain. Santa had shown her a glimpse of what a day was like at his workshop. She danced on tiptoes and twirled around on the cold, squeaky floor. And suddenly the room was empty of its glorious Christmas treasure. She ran to where the tree had been, and then to where the porcelain doll stood over the tea kettle. But nothing. They were all gone. She backed up in amazement, blinking her eyes, when she felt something touch her heel. Why, it was a pair of reindeer antlers. And a pile of what looked like the fluffy fur of cinnamon-colored reindeer. She ran to the window, but no sign of anyone disappearing over the mountaintop. Her little brother lay sleeping very still. The rope that held the door tight was again securely fastened. No footprints or sleigh tracks in the snow. The moon and stars and wintry night seemed undisturbed. There was no evidence that anyone or anything had passed through the clouds and delighted her in the excitement of Christmas, except for 2 reindeer antlers and a fluffy pile of cinnamon-colored reindeer fur. The clock chimed 6:15. It was the edge of dawn on Lindbergh Mountain. The church bells rang, but there was nothing that sounded like the bells of elves ringing in the frosty air. Nothing hurried or scurried around the room. No trace of Santa was to be seen. Just then, Kristen saw a note on the floor next to the fluffy pile of cinnamon-colored reindeer fur. And she noticed that a blazing fire crackled up in the old coal stove. And then a most splendid sight appeared. She saw 62 bags of coal and 9 bags of shiny coins, neatly wrapped with red and green twinkling lights. And then she picked up the note and read, "Dear Kristen, you only asked for one gift this year. Coal for a fire to keep your family warm. For over 500 years, all of the magic and mystery of Christmas has been bestowed upon the marvelous reindeer. And when they shed their fur and shed their antlers, the magic stays within. And Kristen, this year you are the very special little girl who is receiving the secret of the reindeer. The Christmas folks worked extra hard tonight to bring you a sample of every toy that we make at the North Pole. There are 8,675 toys and gifts hidden here, every size, color, texture, and fabric. When you stroke the magic reindeer fur, surprises will appear that you can share with others." And the note continued. "Stroke once and a hidden room will open behind the bags of coal. The room will instantly fill with clothes, mittens, hats, coats, socks, shoes, and bathing suits. Stroke twice for toys, and a room filled with cars, puzzles, records, trains, carousels, and dolls will appear. And if you stroke the fur 3 times, you will have bread, fruit, cake, candy, salad, cheese, pizza, eggs, and meat. Throughout your life, Kristen, you will find people in need. You now have some of Santa's magic powers to help your family and others by stroking the magic fur. Now tap the fur once ever so gently for a very special surprise. Kristen reached out and gently touched the fur. And it was like pushing Santa's magic button. The room was aglow once again with the magic of Santa and his workshop. Sleigh bells rang, elves ran to and fro carrying colored lights, and hundreds of tiny Christmas folk were beginning to peep in the windows. And she looked back at the note, where Santa had written something very special. P.S. Dear Kristen, Cupid had a baby reindeer tonight, and he's too young to fly with us this year. Could you please take care of him for us? I know that your family will give him lots and lots of love. Kristen couldn't believe her eyes and the warm, wonderful glow she felt inside from the magic that Santa had brought. She couldn't wait another minute to wake her mommy and daddy and baby brother. Because Christmas on Lindbergh Mountain became the most magical Christmas of all.